Hi, my friend. Welcome to Daily English Podcast. You're in the right place now. Today, I want to share something special with you. Not one, but two stories. Both quiet, both powerful, both told in simple English, but filled with meaning you'll feel in your heart. The first is called The Empty Chair at Dinner, a story about a father, a chair he always kept empty, and a child who finally understood why. And the second, it's called The Old Man Who Sat in Silence, a story of a stranger on a park bench who said almost nothing, yet somehow taught everything. These aren't just stories, they're reflections of love, loss, and the lessons we don't always hear out loud. So take a deep breath. Let the world slow down for a moment and just listen. Because sometimes what stays with us isn't what was said, but what was felt. Let's begin. Every night at exactly 6 p.m., the plates were placed on the table. The water was poured. The food was still warm, and one chair, at the far end of the table, always remained empty. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't because someone was late. It wasn't because they'd forgotten to set it. It was deliberate. And as a child, I never really understood why. My father was quiet, the kind of quiet that filled a room without needing to raise his voice. He worked with his hands. He prayed with his eyes closed. He loved through what he did, not always through what he said, and no matter what kind of day he had. When dinner came, he showed up. Always. Except for that one seat. The one he never sat in. The one he never allowed anyone to sit in. I used to ask him, "Papa, why do we always set that chair? Nobody comes." And he would just smile, softly without words, and say, "One day, you'll understand." I didn't like that answer. I wanted stories. I wanted reasons. But instead, I got silence. And somehow that silence said more than any explanation ever could. For years, that chair stayed the same. Sometimes it was polished. Sometimes it was dusty. Sometimes we lit a candle near it. On holidays, birthdays, or nights when my father said nothing at all, but his eyes said everything. Still, no one sat there. Guests would ask. Neighbors would raise eyebrows. But my father never explained. He'd just pull the chair out like he was making room for someone only he could see. And then he'd eat quietly, smile gently, and carry the moment like a secret. As I got older, I stopped asking. Not because I understood, but because I had learned some answers don't come through words. They come through time, through stillness, through presence. And so the chair became normal, a part of our lives like the ticking clock, the chipped dishes, the smell of warm bread on Sundays. Something that was always there, even when no one spoke about it. But one day, that changed. It was winter. The wind had that quiet kind of bite. Not loud, but sharp. The kind that slips into your coat and makes you hurry home. I had just come back from school. Older now, busier, more distracted by the world outside, and I found my father in the kitchen, standing in front of the table, but not moving, just staring at the empty chair. He didn't see me come in, didn't turn when I dropped my bag. Didn't blink for a long time, and something in me froze, because for the first time, he looked lost. Not sad, not angry, just gone. I didn't speak, just stood there, watching the man I'd always seen as strong look smaller than the room around him. His shoulders, usually broad and steady, seemed tired, as if he was carrying something invisible that had finally gotten too heavy. He reached out, one hand on the top of the chair, not pulling it out, not moving it, just touching it. And then, in the quietest voice I'd ever heard from him, he whispered, "Still saving your place?" I don't think he knew I heard him, but I did. And that moment marked the beginning of everything I hadn't understood. Until now. That night at dinner, we sat in silence. The usual clatter of dishes felt distant, the warmth of the room, colder somehow, but the chair stayed there, empty, honored, untouched, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel annoyed by it. I felt curious, respectful, a little scared, because something in me knew this wasn't just about a missing guest. This was about love, grief, hope, and something else I couldn't name. Not yet, but I could feel it, like a soft hum in the air, right between the silence and the candlelight. That night, after the dishes were washed and the lights turned low, I lingered in the kitchen. My father was outside. He always stood on the porch after dinner, hands tucked. Behind his back, eyes lost in the sky as if searching for something he refused to explain. I sat at the table, staring at the chair, and for the first time, I imagined someone sitting in it, not a stranger, not a guest, someone who belonged, someone he missed, and that's when the question finally formed in my heart, not out of frustration, but out of quiet ache. Who are we waiting for? I didn't ask him that night. I couldn't. There was something sacred about not knowing, about letting that chair remain a mystery just a little longer. But my eyes began to notice more. Photos tucked away, faces I didn't recognize, a drawer in his study that he kept locked, though it held nothing of value except maybe memories. And one afternoon, when I came home early from class, I found him asleep in the living room, an old photograph resting on his chest. It was weathered, folded in the corners, held like a prayer. It showed him much younger, arms around, a boy with eyes too familiar to ignore. And just like that, I knew. The chair was for him. I held the photo gently, careful not to wake him. But it was already too late. His eyes opened, not startled, not afraid, just calm. He looked at me, then at the photo, and for a long time, he said nothing, until he did. "That's your brother," he whispered. "My firstborn, before you, before everything." He sat up slowly, hands folding in his lap like a man preparing to tell a story he never thought he'd share. "He was 7 when we lost him," he said, voice steady but soft. "Fever came fast. Doctors tried, but his body, he wasn't strong enough. His words didn't tremble, but his breath did. I promised him I'd always make space for him, at the table, in the house, in my heart." He looked at the chair again, like it was part of his body. He loved dinner time, the stories, the food, the way we'd laugh even on the hard days. A pause, and I couldn't just take his place away. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. So I did what I had seen him do so many nights before. I sat beside the chair, in silence, in stillness, in the same soft way. He had honored it all these years, and for the first time I didn't see it as empty. I saw it as full of memory, full of love, full of a bond that never broke even after death. I saw my father, not just as a quiet man, but as a keeper of promises, a protector of presence. After that night, dinner felt different. The chair was still there, still untouched, still sacred. But now I understood. It wasn't about loss. It was about love. About the kind of love that shows up even when no one else does, the kind that doesn't erase, but holds space, without rushing, without asking for closure, just showing up, again and again. And I realized something then that I'd carry into my own life. Presence is the loudest form of love there is. After that night, dinner felt different. The chair was still there, still untouched, still sacred. But now I understood. It wasn't about loss. It was about love. About the kind of love that shows up even when no one else does. The kind that doesn't erase, but holds space, without rushing, without asking for closure, just showing up again and again. And I realized something then that I'd carry into my own life. Presence is the loudest form of love there is. One evening, my daughter asked me, "Papa, why do we always leave this chair out?" And I smiled. Not because I was ready to explain, but because I'd heard those same words before. I looked at her, eyes curious, voice soft, just like mine had once been, and I said what my father had said to me. "One day, you'll understand." She made a face, not quite satisfied, but I didn't rush it. Some things need time, and some stories tell themselves when the heart is ready to hear. It's funny how the things that once confused us as children become the very things that center us. As adults, I used to think the empty chair was strange, pointless, even a little sad. But now I see it as something sacred, a ritual of remembering, a symbol of steady love, a soft whisper across generations that says, "You mattered. You still do. And you always will." As the years moved forward, my daughter grew. So did her questions. She began noticing more. The way I placed the plate with care, the way I never rushed through dinner, the way I would glance just briefly at that one chair before we ate. "One night?" she asked again. "Is the chair for someone we lost?" Her voice was quiet, not afraid, just open. "No," I said gently, "but your grandfather did, and because he loved them, I choose to remember too." She was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. A soft, wise smile that children sometimes carry when they feel something deeper than they can explain. "I think that's beautiful," she said. And in that moment, I knew. She was beginning to understand. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with understanding something you once questioned. the chair no longer felt like an absence. It felt like a presence, a gentle, unseen hand reminding us to slow down, to look around, to cherish the ones at the table, and honor the ones who couldn't be. It became more than a tradition. It became a way of living, a reminder that love doesn't disappear when people do. It lingers, in silence, in stillness, in the way we show up even when no one's watching. On her 10th birthday, my daughter made a small card and placed it on the empty chair. It read, "You are still part of us." She didn't ask for approval. She didn't say a word. She just did it. And I felt tears rise quietly in my eyes. The kind you don't cry from pain, but from the deep recognition that something has come full circle. She didn't know my brother. She'd never met my father when he was young. But she understood them, because we remembered them with presence, because the chair kept them in the room. On her 10th birthday, my daughter made a small card and placed it on the empty chair. It read, "You are still part of us." She didn't ask for approval. She didn't say a word. She just did it. And I felt tears rise quietly in my eyes. The kind you don't cry from pain, but from the deep recognition that something has come full circle. She didn't know my brother. She'd never met my father when he was young. But she understood them, because we remembered them with presence, because the chair kept them in the room. On her 10th birthday, my daughter made a small card and placed it on the empty chair. It read, "You are still part of us." She didn't ask for approval. She didn't say a word. She just did it. And I felt tears rise quietly in my eyes. The kind you don't cry from pain, but from the deep recognition that something has come full circle. She didn't know my brother. She'd never met my father when he was young. But she understood them, because we remembered them with presence, because the chair kept them in the room. On her 10th birthday, my daughter made a small card and placed it on the empty chair. It read, "You are still part of us." She didn't ask for approval. She didn't say a word. She just did it. And I felt tears rise quietly in my eyes. The kind you don't cry from pain, but from the deep recognition that something has come full circle. She didn't know my brother. She'd never met my father when he was young. But she understood them, because we remembered them with presence, because the chair kept them in the room. When my father passed, we kept his chair open too. Same spot. Same table, same quiet presence. It felt right. Not because we were pretending he'd come back, but because he never really left. We heard him in the creak of the floorboards, in the smell of the stew, in the way we paused before picking up our forks. We didn't need photos to remember. We didn't need stories. We had the chair. And it said everything, more than words ever could. Now my daughter is grown. She has her own family, her own table, her own rhythm of life. But one evening, as I visited her new home for the first time, I noticed something that made my breath catch. A chair at the far end of her table. Perfectly set. Unoccupied. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because when she caught me looking, she smiled. And in that smile, I saw every quiet dinner, every silent promise, every unspoken lesson passed down without needing a single word. Some things, she said softly, don't need explaining. And I knew she was right. The chair didn't need a name, didn't need a label. It just needed to be there. Held, not filled. Honored, not questioned. She had understood, not from a single conversation, but from a lifetime of witnessing what love looks like when it lingers quietly. She had watched me, just as I had once watched my father, and now the chair had found its way into yet another home. Some things, she said softly, don't need explaining. And I knew she was right. The chair didn't need a name, didn't need a label. It just needed to be there, held, not filled, honored, not questioned. She had understood, not from a single conversation, but from a lifetime of witnessing what love looks like when it lingers quietly. She had watched me, just as I had once watched my father, and now the chair had found its way into yet another home. Now, when people ask me, "What's the most important thing your father ever taught you?" I don't talk about work ethic, or discipline, or the lessons he gave with words. I talk about the chair, the one he never filled, the one he set with intention, the one that taught me everything about what it means to keep someone with you without holding on too tightly. That chair was love, grief, memory, hope, all wrapped in silence. The world moves fast. We rush from place to place. Scroll through moments. Skip over the sacred. But the chair, it slows us down. It invites us to breathe, to notice who's missing, and to honor them. Not with sadness, but with reverence. It reminds us that presence isn't always loud. That love doesn't always look like holding on. Sometimes it looks like making space, letting silence speak, and trusting that what matters most doesn't fade, even if it changes form. There were days I wanted to move on, to forget, to stop setting that chair. Grief is heavy sometimes. It asks you to carry what you can't fix, but I never did, because something about that quiet space grounded me. It reminded me that what we love will shape us long after it leaves us. It reminded me to be gentle, to be patient, to never assume I know what someone else is carrying. And most of all, it reminded me to show up for the people I still have while I can. As years passed, the chair remained, but the feeling around it changed. It no longer held the weight of sorrow. It held warmth, respect, gratitude. It became a tradition, yes. But more than that, it became a promise that we would not forget, that we would always make room for those we love, even when they're no longer here to take their seat. And in that way, the chair didn't just remember the past. It shaped how we lived in the present, more aware, more connected, more human. One evening, my daughter set the table for a celebration. Friends were coming over. Laughter would fill the house. Music would echo in the hallway. And still, she sat. The extra chair. I watched her carefully fold the napkin, light a small candle beside it, and place a flower in the center of the plate. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. She looked at me and whispered, "Just because they're not here doesn't mean they're gone." And in that moment, I realized the legacy had become hers. Not through telling, but through living. We didn't toast to the chair that night. We didn't draw attention to it, didn't make a speech, didn't explain to the guests what it meant. We didn't need to. Its presence was enough, and in some way, everyone at the table felt it. That quiet anchor, that silent respect for the ones who shaped us, but couldn't sit with us. It didn't bring sadness. It brought calm, peace, something sacred. Not a weight, but a warmth. The kind that only comes when love is remembered without needing to be spoken. I've come to believe that every family has their own version of the chair. Maybe it's a candle lit at the same time each night. Maybe it's a song played during holidays. Maybe it's a story that keeps being told over and over again. These aren't habits. They're heartbeats. Ways we hold on without clinging. Ways we keep people close without needing to rewind time. The chair is just how we did it, but the meaning is universal, because every soul in some way is still waiting to be remembered. Some people ask, isn't it painful to keep looking at that empty chair? And I understand why they ask. Because yes, it used to hurt. It used to sting like an unanswered question, like a door that would never open again. But over time, the pain softened. It didn't disappear. Grief rarely does, but it became something else, a tenderness, a reminder, a quiet kind of love that asks nothing but to be remembered. And the chair became that place, where memory sits and never has to leave. Now, when I sit down for dinner, I don't just think about who's at the table. I think about who shaped me into the person who's setting it, the voices that guided me, the love that held me, the moments that built me, even when they broke me first. And the chair, still there, has become something more. It's not just about the ones we lost. It's about how we live in their honor, how we choose presence when the world tells us to rush, how we choose stillness when noise would be easier. Life teaches us in strange ways. Some lessons come through words, some through mistakes, and some through quiet rituals that no one explains until you feel them in your soul. That chair, always open, always waiting, was one of those lessons. It taught me that love doesn't end. It evolves. It finds new shapes, new places to sit, new ways to be present. It taught me that you don't need to be loud to make an impact. You just need to be consistent, to show up, again and again. Now I don't set the chair out of grief. Set it out of gratitude for the love I received, for the people who shaped me, for the lessons I carry that were never spoken, only shown. When my daughter sets it now, I don't correct her, I don't guide her, I simply watch and trust that she knows what I know. That presence isn't about being seen. It's about being felt, and even an empty chair can be the fullest thing in the room when it holds the right kind of love. I think back often to the first time I noticed the chair, how confused I was, how uncomfortable it made me, how I wanted answers that wouldn't come until I was ready to receive them. Funny, isn't it? How we resist the very things that later become our greatest teachers. The chair never changed, but I did. I learned to listen, not just to words, but to silence, to presence, to all the invisible ways love speaks when you stop trying to fill the quiet. Some nights when everyone's asleep, I walk into the kitchen and I sit beside that chair. No music. No conversation. No distractions. Just breath. Just memory. Just stillness. And in that space, I feel everything that ever mattered. My brother's laugh. My father's quiet strength. My daughter's gentle wisdom. My own heart beating softer than usual but truer than ever, and I realize this isn't about death. It never was. It's about love that stays long after the room is empty. We all have something we carry, a name we whisper in our minds, a face we see in the quiet, a memory that visits when the world slows down. For me, it's that chair. But for you, it might be something else. A song. A scent. A place you return to in your thoughts. Whatever it is, don't rush it away. Because healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering in softer ways. Ways that don't ache as much. Ways that bring peace instead of pain. Ways that allow love to stay. So now, when I walk past the table and see that open chair, I no longer feel sorrow. I feel presence. I feel every moment I spent with the people who shaped me, and I feel hope, because my daughter saw it too, and one day when I'm gone and the table is hers to set, she'll leave that space open, not out of habit. Not out of grief, but out of understanding. That love doesn't ask for noise, it just asks for space. My friend, if you've ever lost someone and didn't know how to hold on to their memory, this story is for you. If you've ever wished for one more dinner, one more smile, one more ordinary moment, let this be your gentle reminder. You don't need to fill every silence. You don't need to rush past what aches. Sometimes you just need to leave a little space. A space where love can breathe. A space where memory can sit down. A space that says, you mattered. You still do. And you always will. So tonight, maybe set one extra place. Not for someone who's coming, but for someone who's never truly left. Let the chair stay empty. Let your heart stay full, and let that be enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with your heart. This was The Empty Chair at Dinner, a story not about loss, but about love that refuses to leave the room. Until next time. Keep speaking with love, and keep listening, even when there are no words. You are never alone. This is the Daily English Podcast, and this story will stay with you forever. There's a clock in our family's old house, a big wooden one, heavy, tall, and slow. It stood in the hallway like a quiet witness to everything that ever happened inside those walls. Its ticking was soft, but constant. A rhythm that wrapped around our days. You didn't notice it until you did, until the house was too quiet, until the silence made the absence of that ticking feel loud. The day my grandfather passed away, the clock stopped. Not gradually. Not because it was broken, it just stopped. Right at the moment he took his last breath. At first, we thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the gears jammed. Maybe the weight slipped. But when my father tried to wind it, nothing. The hands didn't move. The chime didn't ring. The heart of the house was still. No one said anything at first. We just let it sit there, frozen in time, like we were, if repairing it would somehow disrespect the silence. As if letting it stay still was the only way to honor what we lost. The funeral came and went like a rainstorm in summer. Heavy, brief, impossible to ignore. People cried. Some didn't. Some couldn't. We all went back to the house afterward, but no one really went back to living in it. We were just there, walking through familiar rooms, trying to remember how to breathe normally without feeling like we were doing something wrong. And still, the clock didn't tick. Days passed, then weeks, and every time I passed the hallway, my eyes would flick to it. The clock with its motionless hands, frozen on the time of his last breath. I memorized the numbers. 2:17, that's when the world shifted. Not with sound, not with drama, but with silence. Time didn't just pause that day. It curled up and refused to move forward. And honestly, so did we. Grief is strange. People tell you it fades, that it softens, that life goes on, but they never tell you how much of you stays locked in that one moment where everything changed. For us, that moment was 2:17, and every time I walked past the clock, it felt like I was walking past him, still, present, but unreachable. I wondered if that's why no one fixed it. Maybe we weren't ready to move past that minute, because deep down, we were afraid of what would happen if we let time start again. We never said it out loud, but the clock became sacred. We dusted around it, stepped lightly near it, never leaned against it, never touched it, not even the smallest nudge. It stood there like a monument, not just to him, but to us, to our stuckness, to our pain we hadn't learned how to name. Every family meal after, that felt shorter, quieter, like the air had less oxygen, and no one wanted to take too much of it. Even our laughter felt out of place, like it didn't belong in a house where the clock no longer ticked. One evening, I found my little sister, sitting in front of it, cross-legged on the hallway floor, just watching it, not crying, not talking, just watching. She whispered, "Do you think he's still in there?" I didn't know what to say, because part of me believed it too, that maybe his soul had curled itself around the clock's gears, that he had found a way to stay close, by keeping something still in a world that wouldn't stop spinning, and maybe we needed that. To feel like he hadn't truly gone. To feel like the world still knew what time it was when he left. I used to wonder if maybe grief was contagious, not in the way that spreads like a cold, but in the way it shifts how people move. Everyone in the house moved slower now, softer, like we were trying not to wake something. We tiptoed through our own lives, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The clock stood there, frozen in that exact moment, and somehow we felt frozen too. Not forever, but for long enough to feel the stillness etch itself into our bones. Eventually, life tried to go on. Groceries were bought, shoes lined up at the door, mail piled on the kitchen table. But something was missing. It wasn't just him. It was motion, that feeling that things were happening, that time was moving, that we were all part of something unfolding. But when a clock stops, something in you stops too. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's quiet. Like a page that refuses to turn. And no matter how much you want to keep reading, you can't move forward until something inside you is ready. Eventually, life tried to go on. Groceries were bought, shoes lined up at the door, mail piled on the kitchen table. But something was missing. It wasn't just him. It was motion, that feeling that things were happening, that time was moving, that we were all part of something unfolding. But when a clock stops, something in you stops too. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's quiet, like a page that refuses to turn. And no matter how much you want to keep reading, you can't move forward until something inside you is ready. One day, my mother pulled out a box from the attic. It was dusty, smelled like old wood and lavender. Inside were photos, letters, pieces of him that had been kept safe, maybe for this moment. We sat in the living room, surrounded by silence and soft memories, and for the first time in months, we didn't talk about the silence. We talked about him, his laugh, his way of folding napkins, the jokes he told over and over, and slowly something shifted. Not the clock, but us. We were remembering without hurting. We were letting love rise without drowning in it. That night, after we packed the box away, I found myself standing in front of the clock again. I looked at the hands, still at 2:17, still silent. But this time I didn't feel that same weight. It was strange. The clock hadn't changed, but I had. I didn't. See just what we lost. I saw what we had, all the dinners, the stories, the way he'd clear his throat before saying something wise, the way he made time feel like a gift, not a race. That night, I didn't need the clock to tick, because memory was doing something stronger than time ever could. In the weeks that followed, we started telling more stories, not just about him, but about us, before the stillness. We laughed louder. We played music again. We let the house breathe. And every so often, someone would pause in the hallway and glance at the clock. No one touched it. No one moved it. But something about it felt different now. Not a wound. Not a monument. A reminder that sometimes when time stops, it's not the end. It's an invitation to notice what truly matters. The funny thing is, we never agreed to leave the clock untouched. No one said, let's keep it this way forever. But we did, for months, then years. It wasn't out of fear. It wasn't superstition. It was something deeper, respect. Because that moment, that minute on the clock, was sacred. It wasn't just when we lost him. It was when we began to understand how much space love truly takes up, and how silence, when wrapped in memory, can be louder than words ever could be. One afternoon, my niece, just 5 years old, and was walking down the hall. She stopped, pointed at the clock, and said, "Why doesn't it work?" We all froze, because no one had asked that in years. My sister knelt down beside her and said, "It stopped when Grandpa went to heaven." The little girl blinked, looked at the clock, then said softly, "Maybe it's waiting for us to be ready." And just like that, a child gave language to everything we hadn't been able to say. It wasn't just a clock. It was our pause, our permission to grieve slowly. It's always the children who speak the truth we've forgotten how to say. Their eyes haven't learned to hide yet. Their hearts haven't learned to shrink. So when she said, "Maybe it's waiting for us to be ready," we didn't correct her, because deep down, we weren't. Not completely. We were living again, yes. Smiling more. Breathing easier. But the clock still stood as a quiet question we hadn't answered, and maybe we needed that. Maybe part of healing is knowing some things can remain unfinished and still be beautiful. That fall, we had dinner together for the first time in a long while. Not rushed, not distracted, just together. The old wooden table creaked like it remembered what it was made for. We lit candles, passed food around, and laughed. Real laughter. Not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that comes when the heart starts to feel safe again. And in the middle of it all, the clock stood still, watching, silent, but somehow smiling too, because healing doesn't mean going back. It means building forward with the pieces that remain. In that dinner, something shifted. We weren't just remembering him anymore. We were becoming him in little ways. The way my brother passed the bread with both hands. The way my mother paused. Before saying grace, just like he used to, we didn't plan it. We didn't try. It just happened. Because legacy isn't a big speech. It's the small things we do without even realizing we learned them from someone we miss. And in that way, he never really left the room. One evening, I stood in the hallway with my hand on the clock's frame. It felt warm, alive almost, like it still held echoes of every moment it ever witnessed. I didn't wind it. I didn't fix it. But I whispered, "Thank you." Not just to the clock, but to everything it stood for. The love, the loss, the silence, the patience, and the reminder that even in stillness, life keeps speaking. Sometimes you don't need to move forward fast. You just need to stay present long enough to feel again. It was early spring when the idea came to me. Not loud, not urgent, just a gentle whisper in the back of my heart. Maybe. It's time. Not to move on. That's never the goal. But to move forward. To allow time to tick again. To let the rhythm return. Not to erase what was, but to carry it forward with softer hands. Stood in the hallway that morning, sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, and I knew I was ready. It had been years, but my fingers still remembered how to open the back panel, how to check the gears, how to wind the small brass key he used every Sunday evening. The moment I turned it, I held my breath. Would it work? Would it make a sound? And then, tick. Just one, then another. Soft. Like a heartbeat coming back to life. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. Not because time was moving again, but because I was. It was strange at first, hearing it tick. Again. Soft, deliberate, like the house itself was remembering how to breathe. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. But in that silence, like in that steady, rhythmic sound, there was comfort. Not because everything was back to normal, but because something had shifted inside us. The clock was no longer frozen in time. And neither were we. We weren't forgetting him. We were honoring him by learning how to live again. That day, my niece came back to the hallway. She looked up at the ticking clock and smiled. "You fixed it," she said. I knelt beside her and whispered, "No." It fixed me, because the truth is, time had always been there, waiting patiently. It never rushed us, never scolded us for our slowness. It just waited, and when we were ready, it started ticking again. Not to push us forward, but to walk beside us at our own pace. That's the quiet gift of healing. It doesn't force. It invites. For the first time in years, the clock chimed, A single warm note echoed through the house. No one spoke. We just listened. It wasn't just a sound. It was a memory, a presence. It was as if he had walked through the front door again, just for a moment to sit in his chair and remind us he never truly left. Grief will always live somewhere in this home. But now, so does peace. That single chime didn't mark the end of mourning. It marked the beginning of gratitude. As weeks passed, we noticed how time felt different. It wasn't rushing us anymore. It wasn't something to fight against. It was gentle, patient, kind. And in that kindness, we started living differently. We ate slower, spoke softer, looked each other in the eyes a little longer. The ticking wasn't just a sound now. It was a reminder that life isn't about how much time we have. It's about what we fill it with. Presence, laughter, love, and sometimes silence. There's something sacred about carrying someone in your heart. They don't speak anymore, not out loud, but their voice still echoes in your choices. Their presence lingers in the way you hold a hand, fold a napkin, or pause before speaking. He was in all those things. Not in the past, but in the present. Because when love is real, it doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes the invisible thread that holds you steady even when the world feels fragile. I used to think healing meant forgetting less, that I had to hold on tightly or risk losing him. But now I see it differently. Healing is trusting that what's real never leaves. It lives inside you, quietly, consistently. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't need reminders. It simply is like the soft tick of a clock that you stop noticing, but would feel lost without if it were gone. He became that rhythm in my life, always there, always steady, even in silence. There came a day when I didn't flinch walking past the clock, didn't hold my breath. I didn't ache. I just walked, present, calm. And that, I think, is what healing looks like. It's not about waking up one morning and being over it. It's about reaching a moment where you stop bracing for pain and start allowing joy to come in without guilt. Not because you've moved on, but because you've moved with the memory. That's how love matures. It stays with you, even as your life moves forward. I began to see him everywhere, not like a ghost. Not with sadness, but with a kind of softness that made my eyes water for a beautiful reason. In the way the sun fell on the porch, in the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, in the quiet hum of the house at night. I didn't need to visit his grave to feel close to him. He was in me, in us, in the way we lived. And I realized something I never understood before. Grief doesn't shrink. You grow around it. And when you do, you start hearing the ticking, not as a loss, but as a promise. Time didn't heal us. It held us. It wrapped its arms around our ache and waited. It didn't rush us, didn't demand we get better, didn't erase the pain. It simply stayed, quiet, constant, ticking. Until one day, we realized we were moving too. Not away from him, but toward something deeper, a life not defined by what we lost, but enriched by what we still carried. That's the quiet gift of time, It doesn't take love away. It teaches you how to live with it differently. Now, when I sit at the dinner table, I sometimes look toward his old chair and smile. I don't expect him to walk through the door. I don't ache the way I used to. I just feel full, not of sorrow, but of gratitude, because what we shared, what he taught us, what still lives inside the walls of this house, it never left. Love doesn't follow the same rules as time. It lingers, it listens, it lifts you, even when everything else goes quiet. Years passed. The seasons turned like pages in a book we no longer feared reading. The house aged gently. Paint faded. Memories softened. But the clock kept ticking. Its rhythm became background music. Not something we noticed, but something we felt. A heartbeat of the home. A whisper of continuity. It wasn't about the time it told anymore. It was about the life it witnessed. Laughter, arguments, new babies, old recipes. It held all of it, quietly, faithfully, the way love does when it's rooted deep. One morning, my daughter, now grown, called me from the hallway. "Mom," she said, "this clock is kind of magical." I smiled. "What makes you say that?" She looked at it closely, tilted her head, and whispered, "It sounds like it remembers things." I didn't correct her, because she was right. The clock remembered. It remembered the quiet grief and the loud healing. It remembered who we were, who we lost, and who we became. And now it was passing that memory into her hands too. Because love, real love, teaches the next generation how to listen. My daughter started winding the clock herself. Every Sunday evening, just like her grandfather once did. She didn't say much about it. She just did it. Like it was always meant to be her turn. And in that small gesture, I saw the circle complete itself. She didn't know the full weight of the clock's story, but she felt it. Not as grief, but as grace. And I realized, sometimes, we pass on more than photos and names. We pass on silence, stillness, and the quiet rituals that teach us how to stay grounded even when life moves fast. One evening, she asked me, "Did Grandpa ever fix things with words, or was he just there?" I looked at her. So young, yet somehow so wise. "He didn't need many words," I said, "because presence speaks louder." And that's what the clock became for us. Presence. It didn't tick to remind us of time passing. It ticked to remind us of what never left. A kind of steady love that outlives the body, that lingers in rooms, in voices, in quiet pauses before a memory returns. I used to think grief was something you moved through, like a tunnel, dark with a light at the end. But now I know. It's more like a garden. It doesn't go away. It just changes. At first, it's wild and untamed. Thorns everywhere. Hard to breathe, but with time, with patience, you start planting. Stories, laughter, little traditions, and slowly, what once hurt to look at becomes something sacred to tend. The clock taught us that. It became the soil where we grew something new out of what we lost. I often sit in the living room now, not to remember, but to feel. to let the quiet clock tick beside me as I breathe in everything we've lived through. Because that sound, steady, calm, reminds me of him. And also reminds me of me, of who I became because he loved us. Because he stayed steady even when life didn't. I no longer fear time. I walk with it. Because when love is planted deep, even silence grows flowers. One afternoon I caught myself humming, not a song I'd heard recently, not something from the radio. It was a tune he used to whistle while reading the paper or walking to the garden, and just like that, he was with me again. Not as a memory, as a rhythm. It struck me. We don't only remember people in moments. We remember them in movements, in the way we stir tea, in the way we look out the window before we speak, in the quiet hum of a tune we didn't even know we remembered. Time doesn't erase those things. It reveals them. Years had passed. The house was older. So was I. But the clock still ticked. Gentle, patient, sure. It no longer felt like a symbol of grief or a monument to pain. It felt like home. That was his final gift to us, I think. Not the clock itself, but what it taught us, that presence, is the greatest form of love. That silence can be sacred. That time, when treated with care, becomes memory, becomes meaning, becomes something that lives far beyond any ticking hands. Now, when visitors come, they often comment on the clock. It's beautiful, they say. Or, does it still work? I always smile. Not because of what it is, but because of what it means. I tell them, yes, it works. It stopped once, a long time ago. And sometimes, if they seem curious, I'll add, it didn't stop because it broke. It stopped because we needed time to remember how to breathe again. And that's the truth. The clock didn't mark an ending. It held space for our beginning in say. This house, the clock doesn't just tell time. It tells a story of loss, of silence, of slow healing, of love that outlives the body. It tells the story of a family who stopped everything to grieve together, and then, when ready, began again. Not by forgetting, but by remembering differently. So now when it ticks, it sings. Not loudly, not proudly, but gently, like a lullaby only your soul can hear. Some clocks are meant to measure minutes, but this one measured moments. Not just what time it was, but what time meant. It stood still when we needed stillness. It waited when we couldn't. It ticked again only when we were ready to move with it. And that to me is love. Not rushing, not fixing, just staying. Like the father who left the room quietly but never truly left. Like the breath you forget you're holding until someone reminds you it's safe to exhale again. Don't look at the clock now to see what time it is. I listen to it to remember that life moves gently if we let it. That grief is not a full stop, but a comma. That love speaks loudest when we are most quiet, and that presence is the greatest legacy anyone can leave. He gave us that, not through words, but through stillness, through patience, through showing up even when he was no longer seen, and the clock, faithful as ever, keeps ticking. not to mark time, but to remind us we are still here, living, loving, becoming. So here we are, at the end of this story, but not at the end of what it means, because some stories don't end. They echo, in quiet rooms, in ticking clocks, in the way we touch a photo frame and pause. Not to cry, but to feel. You don't need to fix every broken thing. You don't need to rush healing. You don't even need to move. You just need to listen. To presence, to memory, to the slow, steady beat of love that never left your side. That's the message of the clock. That's the truth hidden in silence. Thank you for listening, my friend. These two stories may have seemed simple, but sometimes it's the softest words that stay the longest. A chair left empty. An old man in silence. Both taught us something, without needing much to say. Maybe you saw yourself in them. Maybe you remembered someone. Or maybe you just felt seen. And if even one sentence stayed with you, then this story did its job. Come back anytime. You're always welcome here. This is your space to feel, to grow, to learn English, and to understand life a little deeper each time. Until next time, keep listening. Not just to words, but to the moments between them. You are not alone.